Hi, good morning, everybody. My name is Darren Hartley, Chief Exec of TAROE Trust. Thanks for joining this morning. Really pleased to be able to re-welcome back Debbie Larner. Many of you who've attended previous sessions will know Debbie. She'll be a familiar face to you. She's been doing quite a bit of work with us over recent months, especially around Respect for All Charter. She's previously come and spoke to us about building safety as well as professionalisation. Because professionalisation is one of those areas which has been fairly fast moving, it's been quite topical, there's been a lot of new announcements in this area as well. We thought it would be a good idea to invite Debbie back so that we're all up to date with the latest developments in that space. Just a couple of admin type things before we get going. Let's check I'm on. So we're recording today as usual. If you're viewing this on playback, then thanks for going to our YouTube channel. After each session, we will upload the video onto YouTube. Debbie is going to be using a presentation today. So those materials will also be available after the session, and the link that we send around afterwards will give a link to both the YouTube recording and to the slides. As usual, we're using the Zoom platform, so there is the chat function that's available. So please feel free to make use of the chat as we go through. I'll be in the background monitoring that, and there'll be opportunities to pause and stop and ask questions, and hopefully we'll cover what is quite a lot of ground over the next hour. So I'm going to hand over to Debbie to kick off with the presentation. Welcome, Debbie. Thanks very much. Really pleased to have you back.
Thanks, Darren, and welcome. Some familiar faces here with me talking about professionalism again. So let me just get my slides ready for you. So I've got some slides, more of sort of an aid memoir for me, really. And as Darren said, we'll share those after the session. So this is kind of a part two, really, of a session I did earlier this year. I've lost track of time completely. I think it was sort of right at the beginning of the year when we talked through sort of what professionalism was and what it might mean, etc., etc. So as Darren said, we've had some sort of developments since then. So I thought I'd take the opportunity to update you, and they're mainly developments from government. So a bit of context, always useful to set some context. Started talking about professionalism really, both as a sector, but certainly from the government point of view after Grenfell, and sort of specifically after Grenfell, but also after the Grenfell Tower inquiry, where we had lots of quite shocking statements coming out around how tenants weren't being listened to, there wasn't any transparency, even sort of things like institutional indifference. So some really damning statements about the housing sector, about how they responded to and treated residents across the board. So following that, we had a green paper, which was probably, shockingly, it was about 5 years ago now, we had that initial green paper, which talked quite a lot about how housing staff were really contributing to this whole stigma and stereotyping of social housing, not just social housing as a tenure, but also people who lived in social housing, and basically saying it wasn't acceptable, it wasn't good enough, and it had to stop. So you'll all remember back in, again, nearly sort of like 18 months ago, we had the social housing white paper, which was a charter for social housing tenants, which again very much looked at the attitudes and their behaviours of social housing staff in particular towards their residents. And it talked about staff needing to be competent, needing to be respectful, needing to be empathetic, etc., etc. And also we've had quite a lot of stories in the media, probably over the last 18 months, 2 years now, about some of the conditions of stock, not just about the condition of stock, about the really poor attitudes towards residents when tenants actually reporting this issue to their landlords not taking them seriously, their landlords brushing them off, and it's all again back to attitudes and behaviours. So we've got what it seems a bit of an issue in the sector around these attitudes and behaviours towards residents, and we've talked about that before in these webinars, and it's one of the reasons that Darren and I were working on the Respect for All, to look at those kind of attitudes and behaviours that you should expect as residents from housing staff, and housing staff should be confident to be able to behave in that way towards residents as well. So that was one of the drivers for doing that. So as part of the white paper, government committed to doing what they grandly called a professionalisation review. I think, as many things government do, they commit to doing something without actually really knowing what they're going to do or how they're going to do it. And this very much felt like one of those things, but they committed to doing it and they did it. So it was launched by the one of the ministers for homelessness at the time. That was the rhetoric, or why, again, that reason that residents aren't being treated with respect or being listened to. So this review, which Darren, you were part of that, I think, weren't you? See if he's still awake.
Yeah, sorry, I'm still here.
Just testing him.
So we weren't part of the core group because there were so many that were going on. What we did, we had a contact who we were liaising with, and we submitted a number of different kind of documents, letters into the review, which were considered.
Brilliant, thank you. So they talked to lots of people, they talked to lots of residents, they talked to professional bodies, etc., etc. The whole aim was to kind of look at making sure that the people who worked in housing had those knowledge, skills, attitudes and behaviours. So that actually kind of looking at what was out there already, and ultimately the aim is to make sure that anyone interacting with tenants had those right skills and attitudes and behaviours. And they spent some time looking at what was out there already, what qualifications and training were out there, what programmes were out there. So they focused on three specific areas: sort of interpersonal skills, so making sure that all staff had those kind of interpersonal skills, for example, emotional intelligence, empathy, etc. That there was the right leadership across the sector, and that leaders and managers had the right knowledge and experience to be able to run organisations. And they looked at making sure that all housing staff had the sort of relevant knowledge, skills and experience as well to be competent. They use the word competent quite a lot, to be able to know what they're doing and also conduct themselves in a professional manner. So that's the sort of areas that this professionalisation review focused on. They came up with 4 options at the end of the review. One was to move towards this fully professionally regulated social housing, so to create something similar to more recognised professions, I guess, like social work, medicine and the law, looking at mandatory qualifications, mandatory CPD and a register of licensed practitioners. They dismissed that one. They also, the second one was to look at seeing if they could strengthen the powers of the regulator of social housing, so that the regulator would start looking at professional developments, attitudes and behaviours of staff. The third one was to do sort of a voluntary, you could sort of opt in. They were going to work with professional bodies, so like the CIH, to be able to encourage organisations to adopt good practice. A bit mealy-mouthed, really. And the fourth one was to do nothing and just leave the sector to it. And I think that one was dismissed because they felt that was what we'd done, what government had done over the last 10 years, and it hadn't got the sector into a great place. What they did do, they didn't go for the voluntary opt-in model either, because it didn't really have enough teeth. They initially rejected number 1 because they didn't feel it was the right approach. So they opted for option 2, which to give some additional powers to the regulator. But Mr. Gove stepped in, as he often does, As you know, Michael Gove is the Secretary of State for Housing. He has lots of views and opinions, and he has quite a lot of influence. So in September, they announced that they were going to do that second option. They were going to introduce this new regulatory standard on competency and conduct. So they were going to introduce, through the new regulatory system, a standard that the regulator would look at and potentially intervene in, looking at the attitudes and behaviours of staff. We had that in September, all good, all done and dusted. Then Michael Gove intervened again. So in February, we had this announcement on a Sunday. They always do about things on a Sunday. Hopefully people won't notice them. He introduced that there would be a mandatory requirement for what he described as housing managers and senior housing executive to actually have a formal qualification in housing. And they pitched those at a level 4 and 5, which I think is something like a level 4 is something like A levels, and a level 5 is something like an undergrad degree. So quite a high level. And I think it was a bit of a shock to the sector that they were going to mandate these qualifications, especially as they'd ruled it out quite publicly. I think one of the reasons for this, again, is a lot of the bad press and media attention that social housing has had. We had the tragic death of the little boy in Rochdale due to the condition of the home, the damp and mould. We heard other stories in the media, and I think the government thought that enough is enough and they needed to be seen to be doing something quite serious to address that maybe lack of competence and knowledge that they perceive in the sector. So I won't go through that in detail. As Darren said, you'll have the slides, but this is, anyone who's interested in the legal bit, this is what the bill says. So they put this into the social housing regulation bill, which is really, it's gone through Parliament at the moment. It's just at its final stages before it receives a royal assent. So this will become law any day now, any week now. So basically specifying that anyone who works in housing, housing management, at a certain level has to have this qualification. They talked about it being senior housing executives, and they sort of defined that as someone who has a responsibility for the day-to-day management of services and is part of a senior management team. So probably in terms of your organisation, that would be directors, chief exec, but only, what they say is only roles that actually are directly involved in delivering housing services. So people like your director of HR or IT, if you've got them, or finance, probably won't be subject to this. So anyone who's got a direct delivery role in housing, say maybe director of assets, of property, of housing, homelessness, anyone with that kind of title plus the chief exec will have to do this level 5 qualification. They also talked about, as well as executive teams, senior housing managers, and they've defined this. They've used the definition in the Institute of Apprenticeships, their definition of what a senior housing manager is. And again, they've defined it as someone who's involved, where their role involves the management of resources and they have the authority to make decisions. So again, quite a senior role. They have listed some roles here, but I think these roles aren't necessarily at the higher level that we might see when this legislation becomes into law. I think what we'll see is sort of roles in your organisations that are sort of head of level. So head of housing, head of property, head of repairs, that kind of level. So it might be managers, but it'll be more senior managers who have a more senior responsibility and in charge of a department. But as well as introducing these mandatory qualifications, they are still introducing what they're calling this competence and conduct standard. So they're introducing, and this is again what the bill says, they're introducing this regulatory standard that won't just be relevant for senior management, it'll be relevant across the board. And it will mean that registered providers, so housing associations, ALMOs, local authorities, will have to make sure that all their staff have the right knowledge, skills and experience and conduct towards their residents as well. So this is a really big thing. So this is a Baroness Scott of Bybrook. They all have these really daft names, don't they? The people in the House of Lords. Yeah. And I think it's her, this was Baroness Scott, who's basically made this quote to sort of say, you know, this is culture change. This is what's going to be happening. We're going to be changing the culture of organisations, and it applies to all organisations. It's about embedding professionalism from the chief exec through to the very frontline staff, and this is what this is aiming to be. So it's not, you know, the qualifications an element of it, but it isn't the full picture. Pause. Anyone, if you've got any questions, please just shout them out, but we'll have plenty of time for discussion at the end. So I guess in a Donald Rumsfeld kind of way, there's stuff that we know and there's stuff that we don't know. So what we do know is that both the mandatory qualifications that are going to happen in this new competence and conduct standard will be delivered through this regulator's new standard on competence and conduct. The standard will include both of those things that I've just talked about. As soon as the bill becomes law, which should be before the end of this term of Parliament, there's going to be a whole range of consultation exercises. There's lots of opportunities for you guys, for TAROE, to input into this and give our 2 pence into it. So initially, they're going to run a whole set of sector roundtables, and if you're interested, it might be something that we could organise on your behalf to talk to the civil servants, offer your views. There'll be a range of consultations by the department on telling what the regulator what they need to do around this, around both, and then there'll be a whole range of consultations by the regulator when they start drafting these standards as well. It's likely, well, they will be introduced, this new standards will be introduced as part of the whole new framework on consumer regulation, which is being introduced from April 2024. So this whole new proactive approach to consumer regulation that will be starting less than a year from now might be a bit delayed while they're still working it through. We know that staff who haven't got a qualification will have to complete a qualification. And we also know this isn't going to be cheap. So the sort of average cost for a qualification is between 2,000 to 2,500 per person. So if you've got, you know, I can't quite do the math on this, my brain doesn't work in that way, but someone else is better than me. So if you've got 20 staff you need to put through this, you can see it adds up quite quickly. And that's money that obviously won't be spent on other things as well. So this won't be a funded
50,000, Debbie, in that example.
Thank you very much. So it's a lot of it's money that won't be spent on other things as well. Local authorities might get some funding. There's potential for them to get funding under what government calls new burden funding. So if government introduce something for local authorities that is new to them, they often provide, say, new burden funding. The same doesn't apply for housing associations. So if you're a housing association tenant, then it's your landlord who'll be paying for this. Or sorry, your rents that will be paying for this, more specifically. What we don't know, well, there's a lot more we don't know than we know. So we don't know if there's going to be a transition period. So we think the regulations will come into force in April 2024. There's got to be a transition period between April 2024. They can't, and between when people will need to get this qualification. It's so organisations can prepare and also plan for the costing of this. We don't know how long staff will have to achieve the qualification as well. So whether it will say within 12 months, within 2 years, within 18 months, we don't know that yet. We don't know, at the moment they're saying a relevant qualification in housing. Don't quite know what that means at the moment, but it would be interesting to see whether, if, for example, you are a director of repairs and maintenance and you've got a level 4 or level 5 qualification from the Chartered Institute of Builders, whether that will be okay or whether you need to set a housing one as well. So we don't know that yet. We don't know if, like me, I did my qualification 20 odd years ago. So if I was a director of housing now, would I have to do that again? Fortunately, I'm not a director of housing, so I don't have to worry about it. But again, is there a time period when qualifications are relevant? The standard on competence and conduct is really interesting. Really interesting to know how a regulator will regulate for attitudes and behaviours. It's a really interesting thing. And what will compliance look like? It's quite easy for the regulator to understand if housing providers complying with their health and safety requirements, for example, because they look at their performance on how many gas safety checks they've done, how many electrical safety checks they've done, etc., etc. That's really measurable and easy to see. But measuring behaviours is going to be really interesting. And who are they going to be looking for assurance from? Now, I think the answer to that question will be residents. They'll be talking to residents about their experience and their perceptions of attitudes and behaviours. They'll be using some of the tenant satisfaction measures, I would imagine, around respectful behaviour, those kind of perception measures as a bit of a can opener to start those conversations. And again, what sort of sanctions would be appropriate if you don't meet the standards as well? So if an organisation hasn't met the standards, what will the regulator do? How will it approach that? And an interesting thing, going back to the qualifications, if someone doesn't achieve the qualification, then will they lose their job? Can the qualification be removed if there's poor performance? So there's lots of unanswered questions at the moment. So it's quite an interesting time. And I guess my kind of takeaways from this is there's still quite a lot of time to shape this. I think government are very much in listening mode. They kind of get that this is there is a lot of unanswered questions that they don't necessarily know the answer to and want some help. And again, I think, they will be very much looking to boards and residents to help shape this as well, about what good looks like for them. So that's my PowerPoint over. Just over to you really now for a discussion. How'd I do for time, Darren?
That's brilliant, Debbie. Thank you. And there was a lot to cover there as well. I can see Brian's got his hand up. Before I go across to Brian, I'm just going just one other thing, just to highlight on kind of next steps that might be useful in terms of TAROE Trust's kind of engagement in the process, Debbie, is it's our understanding that a bit like some of you might have seen that there was a direction issued by government, or there was a consultation on the direction to be issued by government on the tenant participation and mutual exchange. And really what that says is, whilst the regulator has a set of standards, those standards sometimes have to say what has been prescribed by government. So it's kind of like an extra level of prescription or control, direction from government for a particular area. And they do that on tenant participation and mutual exchange. We know that they control quite closely things like rents and rent increases each year. Then the conduct and competency standard that's to be regulated by the regulator will also be subject to a direction from government. So even once the legislation has been passed, there's a few steps or stages that are going to need to go through. And as Debbie was saying, there's going to be some opportunities to influence this. I think that there'll be the opportunity for us to kind of feed in as part of that process. So once the legislation's enacted, I know, and I've had conversations with government, that they are already drafting up the direction, but there will be a kind of a statutory consultation period on the direction. So we'll be able to kind of feed directly into government on that direction. And then once they issue the direction, is then for the regulator to go through one of their consultation processes. And I know that we're getting quite late by the time like the act goes through, then there's the direction, stuff like that. So I know that the regulator is going to want to do a full consultation. They've also said, though, that they expect to go live with the proactive consumer standards from next April. I think that, if personally anyway, that's looking quite tight. And I think what we might see is the kind of a set of consumer standards that are released, and then some further developments with that. I've had discussions with the regulator as well, and they've committed to holding a webinar with us, so to kind of consult with tenants once there's more details are known and available in this space. So we will do that as well. But I know Brian's been very patient, so thank you, Brian, for being so patient with me twittering on about stuff. So Brian, over to you first, and then I've got some questions as well, Debbie, that I'll come back in with. Brian.
It's okay, you can buy me a coffee in Manchester, Darren.
Yes.
And me. I'll have a beer though, Darren.
It's I just, it's like with all the professional qualifications and all that information. The Ombudsman's report yesterday on Kim, it puts a lot of onus on the staff on the ground. And one of the parts of it where somebody at the moment has, we say, a broken leg, and it needs to be marked down as a vulnerability or an issue for that tenant, but it also means updating information, so that in 6 months' time, when that person is back on their feet, that information is taken off the system. And a lot of this is going to be staff on the ground being amenable, being able to record the information, being there to make sure that it's there. I think probably one of the things which was missing out of it was common sense, and unfortunately you can't get it. You can't get a qualification in common sense, and I think it's the whole emphasis is going to be more on staff on the ground, and them being capable of actually doing what they should be doing. They should have been doing it for the last 20 years, but you know, for some strange and unknown reason, the whole emphasis has gone back to the boardroom instead of back to the ground level, and that shoe leather is not being worn out.
Yeah, if only there was the qualification on common sense, I think we could all do with doing that one. I certainly could. I think it's a really, really valid point, Brian, and I think Paul picks it up a little bit in the chat as well. That kind of, it's very much the frontline staff who engage with residents most of the time. And a qualification, if you're looking at the qualification element of this, qualifications are generally about knowledge. They don't teach skills and behaviours generally, and the apprenticeship model probably does more so. And that doesn't pick up that frontline behaviour. And we've talked about this before in this forum, that actually the attitudes and behaviours you see are generally for more frontline staff, because they're who you engage with on a day-to-day basis. I guess the response to that would be, that's where this, if you park the mandatory qualifications, that's where this competency and conduct standard should pick up on. But it's also unknown what that looks like at the moment, and the reality of how that will be measured, that remains to be seen. But I mean, Darren's spoken to the regulator as well, but I think they will take a very common sense. I think they will take a very common sense approach to this. They're very pragmatic, the regulator, and I think they will. They'll speak to people. They'll get a good sense of what's going on. But also, it won't be How can you show me your certificate? The regulator won't be going in and going, can you show me the certificates that your staff have got? Brilliant, thank you, job done. The regulator will be taking a much more holistic approach where they go, right, okay, what have you done to professionalise your staff? What skills, knowledge and behaviour have you been talking to them about? What training have you put them on? How have you worked with them around their continuing professional development? How have you spoken to them about improving their attitudes and behaviour? They'll want to know that rather than see a piece of paper. That's my hope anyway. That's my hope. I might be being naive.
I was at a session on the 4 million homes last week, and one of the suggestions that came up from one of the people was from one of the people from the cooperative housing group was it's about time they involve tenants in training staff. And he's been asking for it for the last 20 or 30 years, and he's never had a yes.
Yeah.
Well, I'm going to give a shameful plug now for the Respect for All Charter, because when we're talking here about frontline, the behaviours of frontline staff, that was why we developed the Respect for All Charter, because we wanted to be able to say, because Debbie just gave a list of questions. I think one of the other questions that they're likely to ask is, what does good look like? And how do you know that you're delivering that? And the obvious answer is, so you need to engage tenants in that process to be able to understand what good looks like, and for them to be feeding back that this is where we were treated well, and this is the kind of behaviours which are unacceptable. So the Respect for All Charter is highlighting what we think are a set of behaviours which are acceptable, and we worked with tenants. I think there were some people on today's webinar who were part of the workshops on developing that. And when we roll out, when we do sessions on the Respect for All Charter, that's very much about being able to bring tenants and staff together, so that the tenants are actually, this is what is good, this is what isn't good, these are the kind of behaviours which we want to expect to see. I've got a question which I had in advance of today's session from someone who couldn't get here, and what he's done, he's asked, can I formulate it into a question? Because what he set out were a range of behaviours which he felt are behaviours which he felt is unacceptable, and he thinks that all the tenants would think that they're unacceptable. So my general question, the way that I'll formulate it is this: is the training or the culture change, which is kind of associated with being clear about what is and what isn't acceptable, is the culture change and the training combined going to address these kinds of behaviours? And it's almost like a rhetorical question, because the answer is, well, you would hope it would be. And the ones that get it right, there'll be many landlords that will already say this is not acceptable. There'll be other landlords who will look to kind of remove this kind of behaviour, and there'll be other landlords who fall foul and they don't address it, and they'll be the ones, hopefully, that are going to get picked up by the regulator as part of the regulation, because they're not addressing these sorts of things. But the kind of things that he was saying is at times, what he pointed out was, firstly, the interaction that they have is not with kind of senior staff, it's not with customer service, it's the housing officers specifically. And that's the critical role in his perspective, that it's the housing officer who is kind of almost like on the patch. And I know we have tenants that say, well, we never see anybody anymore. And this particular person kind of highlighted that as well. And he says, actually, when you didn't see them, sometimes that was better, because you could get on with your life without the interference. Because one of the things that he reports is things like bullying and quite strong sort of behaviours. And then more kind of insidious things, but things like speaking to some tenants about other tenants, and then applying standards, but applying those standards inconsistently. So saying it's okay for some tenants to do something and then not for others. And then a big issue was about being kind of not appreciating that the behaviours of the housing officer, when they go out to people's homes, they are people's homes. So that when they go, they still see it as a building, and they kind of come in and they're checking around. They take photographs without asking permission to do so, and really just kind of making the person feel that they're being invaded and that they're losing control. But when this is their kind of sanctuary, their home. And then even when it comes to doing works and improvements, the example given was a fence that's subject to crosswinds, strong crosswinds, and they put in a kind of a one which doesn't have the slats in, so the wind blows it down. And the idea is, and all the tenants said, well, if you can look at doing one where the wind goes through it, then that's going to last, because it's really vulnerable to crosswinds. But I think the point here was, actually, if you engage with tenants on the specifications, then the specifications of works can be better for the circumstances, because they're there every day. They understand why things might be going wrong, why things might be breaking down. And actually, that can also be a cost-efficient process. So we've seen reports in the past about an investment, not a cost, was one which we were involved with a few years ago, which highlighted the benefits of engagement from a kind of value for money perspective as well. So I kind of, to sum up, I think it looks like it's a kind of a them and us adversarial approach that you're seeing. And I think what the person was kind of alluding to is, if it was a more collaborative, co-production based approach to delivering services, some of these issues might not be arising. The consequences of this as well is, this person says, well, I don't want to let other people into my house as well. So then you can see the follow on from that is, well, when you need to get access to be able to service the boiler or do those other things, you can see that again adds additional levels of barriers and cost to delivering services from a landlord's perspective as well. So do you think, Debbie, that this is the kinds of things which this is aimed at? Do you think that that's part of it?
I'd love to say yes, Darren, but really cynically, I'm not sure that is the case.
Yeah.
And that's why I think it's really important, while we've got this period, to try and influence and get the powers that be to actually understand what competence and conduct actually really means. It isn't judged by whether you've sent someone on a training course, it's judged by how residents feel and their perceptions. I don't know the answer to that. I think it's really interesting. And I think, isn't it a bit sad that we're at a point we have to get a regulator to step in to talk about attitudes and behaviours? And I'm not tarring everyone with the same brush. I really don't mean to. Organisations should be looking at this because it's the right thing to do, not because the regulator's telling them to do it. Part of me thinks, well, actually we are where we are, so maybe this might give the push that's required, but will it change those really fundamental things? I really don't know, Darren. And I really honestly don't think that the government, and therefore the regulator, really knows what to do with this competency and conduct. I don't think they're clear about what it could look like. So to see any really meaningful impact of change, because that's another question, isn't it? You said, what does good look like and how do we know? What does a good outlook look like for the regulator? What does good conduct and competence look like? Sorry, that's a bit of a rambling answer. I guess the answer is I don't know.
But
We'll see.
I think the takeaway point from that is, though, good might look like different things in different places, but you won't know unless you're engaged with and asking tenants and getting the feedback, and tenants are telling you that this is good or otherwise, isn't it? So it's the kind of age-old stuff which we've known for a long period of time. Judith's got a question.
It's really that I've got a vision that, because I had and probably have some contacts with senior management, because I was on a trust board some time ago, I would like to send the Respect for All document to the board members and get them to agree that they filter it down throughout their organisation. And perhaps if TAROE had the capacity for TAROE to offer a training for anybody within the organisation who wanted it, to unpack what good practice looks like.
Yeah.
Really pleased, Judith, that you said that. What we'll do, we'll include a link in the post-event materials to the charter. Be delighted if you'd be willing to share, and we'd also be we'd welcome providing any services we can to support landlords, if that means that it could improve services for tenants.
Yeah,
because I've noticed that a lot of our meetings that TAROE organises contain both residents, tenants, and members of staff, and the members of staff may actually be tenants or residents as well, so they know both sides.
Yeah,
it's bringing together people who know what best practice is and giving people a framework to work within or to pass on to other people, and say, how are you going to change practices which aren't like this?
Yeah, Judith, I think it's a really good point. I know Paul's certainly been talking to his organisation and his board around Respect for All. Darren and I spoke to the department leading up this professionalisation work. It wasn't that long ago now, was it, Darren? About 6 weeks ago, to talk to them about Respect for All and say, look, don't reinvent stuff out of the blue and in a vacuum. We've been thinking about this. We've been talking to residents. We've got something that can kind of show you what good looks like. We don't necessarily, expect it to be adopted wholesale, but certainly take it and look at it as a starting point rather than, say, reinventing the wheel. We're also got a conversation booked in with the Housing Ombudsman as well, because I think it was Brian who mentioned them earlier. They're picking up attitudes and behaviours and systemic problems and this kind of culture of, they're also mentioning this kind of picking up stigma and stereotyping and stuff like that as well. And again, we want to have a conversation with them. So we're getting this kind of, look, we've been talking about this, we've been thinking about this, we think we've got a great framework for this that organisations can adopt and adapt. So we're trying to kind of get that influence in, aren't we, Darren?
Yeah, absolutely. And the charter itself is freely available. So, we're happy for people to use it. I mean, it'd be great if they ask us, because obviously as we developed it, it would be great if they'd asked us to come and do some work with them as well. But for sure it's available. So happy for anyone, and certainly for if government developing standards and regulators developing standards, then look for it. I've got some other questions if that's okay. First one was just about, could things be, we've kind of alluded to this, and this might be a short response, but certainly when the tenant satisfaction measures were being developed, we know that they were developed first by the regulator because that was something that they could move forward on, whereas they couldn't move forward. They're waiting on the legislation for some of the other more specific regulatory standards to consult on those. I think, do you think there's a risk that the mandatory qualifications have been grabbing all the headlines that people kind of equate professionalisation with mandatory qualifications, and they forget like the broader standards. Do you think there's a risk that people kind of just jump on the bandwagon for mandatory qualifications and don't pay attention to maybe what's in the pipeline?
I don't actually think it's a risk, Darren. I think it's a reality. I think that's absolutely what has happened. I work with a couple of training providers delivering quals, this is with another hat on, and they've been inundated with people just desperate to sign this, not even thinking about it, about what it means, not thinking about workforce planning, not thinking about the bigger picture stuff, just kind of, I need to sign up for a qualification because government told me to do it. And you're kind of going, but actually, what about all your other staff and your frontline stuff? What about this competence and conduct standard? And because people can grasp onto mandatory qualifications, they can grasp onto a level 4 or 5, they can see it written down on a piece of paper, what that involves. Because this kind of competence is, I think people are just either forgotten about it, or because it's so nebulous at the moment, it's not really grasped people. But to me, the competence and conduct standard is the game changer. The mandatory qualifications are a bit of a distraction in my mind.
We don't, you probably don't, do you know how many people or what proportion of the workforce currently have mandatory qualifications? Because I'm like yourself, Debbie, I'm a chartered CIH member and have been for about 15 years, and I've know that the CIH membership, whenever we have like an AGM and things like that, you get all the latest numbers of members of CIH, and I think they've kind of hovered around the kind of 20,000 mark of members, but within that, that's the full range, the full gamut of all the different levels and membership types. That's not a it's not a massive amount of in terms of the proportion of people who work in the sector, is it? And I suppose I suppose there's kind of quite this. I know you mentioned like the idea of like we might be 2,500 to put a member of staff through the qualifications, and then if they've got like 10 or 20 staff to go through, but actually it could be a lot more, couldn't there? Certainly for the very big organizations, it could be massive.
I think you picked up a couple of important things there, Darren. I mentioned in the slide that it wasn't a licensed practice, so this isn't linked to membership of a professional body in any way, shape or form. If it was, if, for example, they said you had to be a qualified member of CIH, so a chartered or fellow CIH to practice in housing, that would make it a licensed practice. Yeah. Similar to you have to be a member of, I'm trying to think of a professional body now, the Law Society to practice law. So if you're not a member of the Law Society, you can't practice law. They haven't gone down that route, and it's quite important to stress that it's not linked to CIH at all. I think CIH would have loved that, but that hasn't happened. And equally, the qualifications don't need to be CIH qualifications. So it isn't linked. I'm just trying to find, there was definitely an article in Inside Housing that said how many people, they don't know how many people have got it. So yeah, they reckon, I don't know where they got these figures from, but they reckon that about 25,000 members of staff will have to do the mandatory qualification. So whether, I don't think that takes into account who might have already done it, but I think that's I'm not allowed to say back of a fag packet anymore, but whatever the modern day equivalent is of a back of a fag packet, guess of how many directors, chief execs and sort of heads of service there are. They'll probably take a few of those out because they've got it already. It's quite a significant amount of people. I think I'm not endorsing this, but actually linking it to membership of a professional body might have been a better way to link it to professionalism, because being a member of a professional body, allegedly you're required to take account of a code of conduct, take account of a code of ethics, practice CPD in a certain way. think about professional standards. So you have got that element of professionalism there. So maybe it would equate more to membership of a professional body. So in a way, it's a bit perverse they've done it the other way round. But equally, if they've done it through you have to be a membership of a professional body, that would have made it a license to practice. And I think they didn't feel that they could do that and had the power to do that. And B, you can just imagine the attrition rate people would have to lose from housing if everyone had to be a member of CIH. I mean, again, obviously that would be great for them.
At the time,
yeah,
so the sector. I was just going to say, at the time, I'm seeing in the sector risk profile stuff about recruitment into the sector is becoming an increasing challenge, isn't it? So,
yeah.
And just on the 25,000 for 2,500 per employee, that's £62.5 million.
Whoa, good maths.
So,
did you do that in your head, Darren?
No, I used the calculator. You mentioned about some of those may already have qualifications, but we don't know what the passporting is either, do we? So,
nope.
So it could be that some of those things have to be. It would be strange if there isn't at least some passporting, wouldn't it? But
it would be, yeah.
Okay. Does anybody else have any questions in this area? Otherwise, we'll draw things to a close a little earlier. I can't see any questions. Okay. Well, what I would say, a couple of things, a couple of information points. Brian mentioned about the announcement, or I think it's the latest Spotlight report, isn't it, that came from the Ombudsman that was issued yesterday, where they said knowledge and information management is the closest thing to a silver bullet. So if anyone's not seen that, they give 21 recommendations on knowledge and information management. So that's a useful report to go to. I've also been alerted that tomorrow, some of you will recall, and we've even had a session a few weeks ago on the Better Social Housing Review, which was undertaken by, well, it was an independent commission on behalf of CIH and NatFed. It was December last year that they published their report. Well, the action plan for how they're going to implement those recommendations from the report is due to come out tomorrow. So that's something to keep an eye out for as well when that gets published tomorrow. We've got a newsletter that's going to be coming out in the next few days, which will highlight some future webinar sessions that we've got in the pipeline. We've got one that's going to be on a kind of a report on scrutiny, which National Federation of Almos has done. And I know that we're going to be joined by Brian as he's going to be part of that session. I think it's the 12th of July from memory, Brian. So looking forward to that. The week before that, we've got a session with York University, and they're going to be coming and talking to us about some research they've been doing in the space of damp and mold, and sort of both the positives and negatives of using technology for monitoring damp and mold in the home as well. So that's a very, very topical issue. And before all of those, we've got a session which is going to be taking place on the 21st of June, which is in relation to a further follow-up report on the issues around furniture poverty. Some of you will have seen quite a lot of press over the last week or so in relation to campaigns which are gathering speed around the current practice of removing things from people's from properties before people before they're let, when they become vacant, and before they're let to a new occupant. It's typical for things like the carpets and flooring to all be removed and so forth. And there's a campaign around leaving some of those things in, and much more broadly about there being furnishings within properties. So Claire Donovan's going to come back and she's going to talk about some further work that they've been doing in that area, and that'll be on the 21st of June. So a fair few things to look forward to. I know that it was mentioned earlier about Manchester, and we'll be present at the Housing 2023. I'll be speaking a session on the Thursday morning, where we'll be saying a little bit about, in fact, incidentally, about the Respect for All Charter, and also about our Feeling at Home research, and the need to understand the needs of individual tenants when delivering housing services. So thank you for joining today. I hope you found this information session helpful. Thank you to Debbie for coming back and delivering this session. Great as always, very informative and well fielded on the questions. You've raised lots of questions as well for us to kind of think about, to see what's going to be developed in the coming months in the area of professionalisation. Well, hopefully it's as sunny as it for you outside as it is for me, and hope many of you can get out and enjoy the weather this afternoon if you're not in work or got other commitments. And I look forward to seeing you at the next session. So thank you very much, everybody. Good to see you.
Thank you, everybody. Take care. Bye.
Bye. Take care. Bye.